Michael Knowles debates viral BLM activist Joshua Joseph.
Okay, so you're saying that there is an objective moral law that is dictated to us by a God of some sort.
Yeah, and it's knowable through reason.
Yeah, and it's knowable, but we've been fallen, and therefore we don't know the moral law. Without substantiating...
No, we do have a reasonable degree of certainty about certain things.
He is talking about the moral law. What is he doing? He's echoing Romans chapter 1, Romans chapter 2, talking about how the Gentiles have the law written on their hearts, how we know right from wrong. And he says, because of the fall, we have drifted further and further away from this moral law. St. Thomas Aquinas would describe it as the natural law, if you will, right? That we are hardwired, not just with a conscience, but the ability to know right from wrong. And this gentleman is pushing back on this. And listen, if you guys didn't notice, Michael Knowles pointed back to the fall, right? And so watch what happens next.
At least 99 of them are going to agree that murder is wrong. But we don't possess perfect intellect and perfect will.
The thing is, the reason why I don't subscribe to that is because there is no demonstration, there is no substantiating that any of that even happened that led to a fallen moral world, and that's why we're here today.
What do you mean by that?
When I say that there's no demonstration, I mean religion is an unfalsifiable concept, in that it's
falsified. You could try to make an argument.
You can't falsify because we have no way of even measuring a supernatural phenomenon, because we have no way to even develop a criteria by which we measure supernatural.
But we can know.
We have no way of measuring a supernatural phenomenon. Here's the issue with that statement. And anyone that's halfway versed in anything regarding the beginning of the universe will concede that science says, just give us one miracle and we could explain everything else. So even in the secular Darwinianism aspect of evolution and the Big Bang and all that kind of stuff, you still need a miracle. This has been acknowledged by Joe Rogan. We've acknowledged it on the channel before. So I don't know if Joshua just doesn't know this, but Michael handles this brilliantly. And by the way, the reason for that set, which I think looks super nuts, is because they're in the Matrix. They're out of the Matrix debating this conversation. So that's why it looks like that. It's pretty dope. So go ahead.
Because like they're not on social media?
Yeah.
Is that what they're saying?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, there are, for instance...
You can believe.
I guess this gets back to what we were talking about earlier, right? I can believe and I can think things and I can have opinions that are my perception of reality, and they can be more or less correct. But when it comes to religion, say, the question is, does God exist or does God not exist?
That's right.
And it seems to me there are many very good arguments for the existence of God.
And it seems to me that there are many very good arguments against the existence
I've never
of God.
seen a good one.
Well, that doesn't mean that there aren't any.
Well, yeah, I thought I've looked for them. I haven't found them.
I'm not sure how confident I am.
So he makes a fundamental mistake that atheists make all the time. I'm not sure if you guys caught it, but I'm going to unpack it here in a moment. But let's let him flesh out his thought.
That you've looked for. I've seen some of your stuff
I was an
reacting to
atheist for
certain
10
people.
years.
I've seen some of your stuff reacting to certain people, how you like portray their argument off. Again, and it's completely fine to voice or frame an argument in a particular way if it goes against something that you deeply hold. But the reason why I don't develop
I don't understand what you mean by that. You're saying that I've articulated a view that you find wrong, but you think it's fine for me to articulate a wrong view?
I'm saying that I think that it's like I won't say fine. I said I think that it's understandable, which I should say.
He's basically saying, I think you're being disingenuous with some of your arguments and the way you approach arguments that disagree with yours.
But I get it because that's your tribe and that's what your core beliefs. So you're naturally going to take that bias.
Exactly.
Couch certain arguments, that you'd couch certain arguments that like disagree with your religion in a negative light or whatever, because I don't think that you've genuinely, honestly gone and searched some good arguments for and against religion.
Did you guys catch it? Did you catch it? Because I don't think you have genuinely and honestly went and searched out those arguments. This is the mistake of every person who deconverts, deconstructs, leaves the faith, and the way they continue engaging with people who are still of the faith. This is the fundamental flaw in how they engage these conversations. I think you haven't genuinely looked at the other arguments. Now listen to how masterfully Michael Knowles answered this.
JJ, I was an atheist for 10 years. I was a pretty ardent atheist for like 10 years. I was quite taken with people like Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and more serious atheists too, like Bertrand Russell, one of the great logicians of the 20th century. And
I believe that your reasoning in this fallen world has been clouded.
It clearly was, because I was taken by the atheists for 10 years.
I believe your reasoning was, because I was listening to the atheist. Yep, I was listening to the atheist.
Went back, or after you went. away from atheism.
Right.
But
Well,
that's a whole
but
other
the thing that
meta
but it's
conversation.
pretty important because ultimately they're going to come down to whether or not God exists.
Absolutely.
Because really basic aspects of how we're even speaking here will come down to that. How is it?
It can come down to that, but again, you have no way of demonstrating that a God exists, that you know that
there are many good arguments for God. I
there's
could
many
give
good
them to you right
arguments. You have no demonstration of whether or not a God exists,
I
what their
certainly
moral
could give
code
them to you.
is, if your God is the correct God, if your God is the only option
only
over
one.
other. Yeah, according to you.
But I happen to be correct.
Yeah, according
He's so snarky.
This is a fundamental flaw I see repeatedly made, assuming that people who are followers of Jesus were never once not followers of Jesus. And then telling them to their face, yeah, I just don't think you really looked at the arguments against God. And you pointed out, imagine being 19 years old,
TikTok star,
and saying this to a Harvard graduate. I know you believe in God and you have good reason to believe in God and defend your arguments, but I don't think you have really looked at the evidence. And then Michael Knowles goes, no, you don't understand. I was an atheist for 10 years, as was I, right? I have. No, you don't get it. They weren't convincing, and that's why I became a theist and eventually became a believer and follower of Jesus. No, I don't believe you. If this isn't hubris and arrogance on Joshua's part,
Oh, totally.
I don't know what is. And then he gets a bit riled up and is saying like, you can't demonstrate God and you can't do this. And it's like, wait. Michael Knowles is having a reasonable, logical, coherent conversation with him about why God exists and about how we can know certain absolute moralities. You can't demonstrate that a soul exists. You can't demonstrate that consciousness exists. There's a lot of things you can't demonstrate that we would all agree to. I mean, the far leftists, even the notion that someone could be born in the wrong body is indirectly a theological statement because it indirectly says
wow.
that there is a soul that is born in the wrong physical body. It's Gnosticism.
That's crazy.
Right. So you can't substantiate that claim. You can't provide any evidence that a soul exists. What you're really saying, if we're just speaking strictly materialistic and naturalistic, what you're really saying is neurological phenomenon should be acknowledged as reality. And I would say, no, there are all kinds of neurological things happening in your feelings, in your thoughts that don't need to be acknowledged by the rest of society.
Yeah.
And probably shouldn't be acted upon for a lot of us. Because some of us before Jesus and even with Jesus thinking, feel some crazy things that need to be suppressed to the truth of God. So this entire notion, I think, is so arrogant, but it's so common for atheists to talk like this.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, I just couldn't imagine being in that position where it's like, I don't think you've thought about it. And he's like,
Yeah.
I've had 10 years as an atheist, as an adult atheist. Not like I'm 10 years old and I grew up in an atheist household.
Right. And just the academic disparity.
The academic disparity is like, yeah, he's in a field that is known for thinking, that is known for research. And then also just like the age difference. Like with age comes wisdom.
Well, at 19, you think you know everything.
Why is that?
Because it's the first part where you start feeling like a grown-up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But your brain's not fully developed and people start treating you like a grown-up because I didn't think he was 19. I mean, this kid, he looks older than 19.
Right, it
He
might be
looks
20 at this point,
He could be
but-
25, 30, 35, 30 years old, right?
Yeah.
So there is a thing about something about your brain at 19, 18, 19. You just think you have it all figured out.
If God were to exist, God would be the creator of all things, by definition.
Yeah.
So God would create not only space, but time, right? So God would necessarily be outside of space and outside of time.
Oh, he wouldn't necessarily. He could.
He would.
Again, we're
If
talking
he's
about
the maker of all things, then he made time.
No, well, I mean, if he's the maker of all things, he could make time, but he could also make himself subject to time because, again, this is the power of a God we're talking about. We're operating on the framework that, as we understand time, the
this
thing that
is-
has to create time has to be outside of it. But like I was saying,
God does enter into time in the incarnation.
yeah, but like
Caught that? He's like, no. God is outside of time, but he can subject himself into time. And he's like, yeah, Jesus.
Yeah.
Like Jesus enters into time. So I like how Michael is taking what he's saying and actually driving him back to the source. Go ahead.
Yeah, not to mention like even just like a metaphor, like another view of it would be like if you're the boss of a company, you can subject yourself to the same hours that
Right.
your employees have to show up.
Right.
Because maybe you want to be there for the team, XYZ.
Right.
But you could wake up someday and be like, I'm not coming in today.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right, right.
In the same way you create that time on a very small level
Right.
as a business owner.
Right.
Like God created time,
Yeah.
can be subject to it by sending
He made the
his
schedule.
son.
He made the schedule.
He made the schedule.
Yep.
And so he can be in it or he can be out of it.
Yep. That's
You've
good.
arrived at an important distinction between
Hold on.
Christianity and Islam.
Before we get to the distinction, I want to press down on the fact that if God has created this water right here, this water currently is not wine. Doesn't matter at which point he decides to make it wine, he has to decide to make it wine. That is, in a sense, the unmoved mover moving. Because you have to be in a state of mind to, okay, I made this is water. I now want this to be wine. That is you making a decision. You are changing your mind about something.
Well, yeah,
if that's the case, then God has to be a moved mover. Because you cannot say that, oh, well, you know what, he's just an unmoved mover, but I'm going to pray to him and he's going to do something for me that he hasn't already done, because he has to change something about himself in order to do that thing.
Well, our lives unfold in history, and the way to understand God's relationship to history is through a concept of providence. Christianity is especially an historical understanding of God, because God takes on human flesh in the incarnation, and lives for 33 years, and then is crucified, and then on the third day rises again from the dead, and then he's on earth for 40 days, and then he ascends up into heaven and sends the Holy Spirit to his church, which is the visible expression of God's kingdom here on earth. So I'm with you in God's role in history, but the error you've made is that you have forced God to be subject to time before God made time.
No, I'm saying, but again, this is assuming that he did any of those things, but I'm saying, how do you know that he couldn't have made himself subject to that time? How do we know that it's without, how do we know that it's outside of the possibility of a God to both create
God
time
has to come,
and create himself in the time? How do we know that
he
one
does
has
it in the
to proceed?
incarnation. He
How
does
do we
it.
know that one has to
He
proceed
keeps
another?
pointing it back to Jesus, and this dude just not getting it.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I don't even get how this is disproving the argument. This is just like this concept of, how do you know God is outside of time? It's like, well, at least we're arguing for God choosing to be in time or out of time. Right. But like, you don't even believe God exists.
Yeah.
We're operating on the framework of God.
Because the creator has to precede the created.
Yeah, but that's
space-time
well,
is
okay.
created. It's part of the physical creation.
Well, does it have to? Again, we're talking about God. If I
What is going on?
create something.
This just goes on and on, man. I'm going to react to some more parts of this conversation just because I think it's so fascinating. There's another part we can go to if you guys want to see another part specifically about morality. But I think the idea that you have to substantiate the existence of God, I think is such a double standard by people who operate in the world that presupposes a bunch of things we can't substantiate. And I wish that the non-believer, the atheist agnostic was just consistent in that. I think it would make the entire conversation way better. And I also think in a good faith conversation, what I'm not going to do is ever assume that someone is being disingenuous in their beliefs.
Yeah.
It's just, you are going into the conversation assuming that the reason why Michael Knowles is a follower, Christian, theist, whatever, is because it serves him versus instead of he wanting to serve God. And that I just don't think is a good way to say, I don't think, in all my 19 years, 20 years of wisdom and knowledge, I don't think you've looked at the best arguments. Like, to a Harvard grad, like, the hubris is outlandish.
Yeah, not to mention if you're 19, there's only like 8 or 7 actionable years of maybe some wisdom. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
There's like, your brain is developing just to like hold a conversation up until 12 years old.
Yep.
Then you have some learning and critical thinking that may be applied. And by 19, you're just, so it's not even like my 19 years of wisdom. It's like 7 of my observation.
Maybe you were sentient for like maybe 10. You know, it's questionable if an 8 or 9-year-old is actually sentient. So at 19, by sentient, I just mean self-aware. You know, like my daughter just started acknowledging that she's a person named Zoe, and she's 2. You know, up until that point,
Zoe.
No, she just didn't even want to acknowledge that her name was Zoe and that she.
That is,
you know what I mean?
So
that's a whole nother conversation about like when does consciousness really start to click? You know, and when do you start like, you know? So,
I think the kids kids start to enjoy life. Like my son is 5 months old. And there's a little like
there's a spark there, but it's not the same.
It's definitely
when you're 14.
It's a spark. That's the best way of saying it. Is that like, oh, he gets me. Like, he cries when mama leaves.
Yeah.
But other than that, he smiles in the morning.
It's very limited.
It's extremely limited.
It's very limited.
Yeah.
We see according to the Bible that prayer is extremely important in terms of us being transformed from the inside out when we get aligned with God's will. For the Christians watching this channel, I want you guys to implement these spiritual disciplines in your day-to-day life. And the only way I've been able to do this consistently is through writing down my prayers in a prayer journal that does a few things. One, it allows me to reflect and come to God humbly and ask him to move on my behalf. And two, it allows me to document my prayers, which ultimately help me remember the very things that I was praying for and see the hand of God tangibly in my life when he answers them. So I would urge you, consider writing down your prayers. It could be in a blank notebook. It could even be on your phone. Or you could check out the one I personally designed and used from my own quiet time and spiritual discipline that I think will be a huge blessing. It's the exact structure and system that I've used for years to pray and be more consistent in my spiritual disciplines. You can pick yours up today by clicking the link in the pinned comment below. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.